Once upon a time, there's a village by the shores of Lake Bafa in the heart of the land, where the water is as wide as the horizon and the breeze smells of salt and freedom. It was here, in the heart of this village, that the story of Olajumoke, the seamstress, and Abiola, the fisherman, began. Let me tell you, this is a story I know well, for I was there, and I saw it all unfold. Olajumoke, you see, was known far and wide as one of the most beautiful women in our village. Her beauty was the kind that stopped hearts, long flowing hair that shone like the midnight sky, skin smooth like the surface of a calm lake, and eyes so bright that they seemed to hold the warmth of the sun itself. She could have had any man in the village, and many tried, including the well-known merchant, Suleiman, whose wealth could feed 100 families. Yet, she turned them all down, and no one knew why. Not until Abiola came into her life. Abiola was not like the other suitors. For one, he was a fisherman, and not just any fisherman, but one who had the heart of the lake in his soul. His canoe, which he named Oluwadarasimi, meaning God has answered, was his most trusted companion. He was not the most handsome man, though his strong arms and calm demeanor had their charm. But Abiola had something that no merchant or prince could buy, an inner peace that came from the quietude of the lake, and a soul that spoke through his prayers. But there was something else about Abiola that made him stand out. He was mute. From birth he had never spoken a single word, yet his presence was like a deep river, strong and steady. He communicated with the world through his eyes, and through a melody that no one but the fish and the water could understand. His songs, played on his flute, spoke the language of the earth. And let me tell you, when Abiola played, the entire village would pause, caught in the magic of his music. One evening, just after the sun had dipped below the horizon and the village was wrapped in the twilight, Olajumoke heard something, no, someone, playing a sweet melody from the shore. It was different from the usual drumming or songs we were used to. It was soft, almost mournful, and yet it carried a certain peace with it, as if it was singing directly to her heart. Intrigued, Olajumoke followed the sound, her feet lightly stepping through the dry grass, and when she reached the shore, there, seated at the edge of the water, was Abiola. His eyes were closed, and his flute was held gently to his lips. The music he played wasn't for any audience. It was simply a prayer, a deep conversation with the lake. He didn't see her approach, nor did he notice her standing there. It was as if he was lost in his world, one where sound didn't matter, only the rhythm of his soul and the whisper of the water. Olajumoke stood there, quietly watching him for what seemed like hours. She didn't know why, but there was something in that music that made her feel as if she, too, was part of the melody. It was as though his song had reached inside her and found the part of her that no one else could see. She knew then that there was something special about him, something that made her heart flutter, even though she didn't fully understand why. The next day, Olajumoke couldn't get the melody out of her head. She went to the marketplace, spoke with the other women, but her mind kept drifting back to Abiola. The rich merchant, Suleiman, had asked her again to marry him, but this time she felt no desire to entertain his proposal. The more she thought about Abiola, the more she realized that his silence was louder than any words she had ever heard. Over the next few days, Olajumoke found herself drawn to the lake each evening, hoping to hear that same haunting melody. And there he was, Abiola, always by the water, always playing his flute as if he were speaking to the spirits of the lake. The villagers noticed her visits, and soon, rumors began to swirl. Olajumoke is interested in the mute fisherman. Now, you must know that in our village, the elders were quick to speak on matters of marriage, and when they heard of Olajumoke's interest in Abiola, they were not pleased. They had already arranged a marriage for her with Suleiman, a wealthy merchant who could offer her comfort, luxury, and status. A mute fisherman, no matter how talented, could never compare to a man with wealth and land. But Olajumoke, despite the whispers of the village, continued to visit Abiola. One evening she spoke with him for the first time. She didn't need words, for they understood each other through their eyes. She smiled, and he smiled back. Though he could not speak, his eyes said everything. "You have a beautiful soul," she whispered, though it was not so much a spoken sentence as it was a thought shared between them. and he nodded, as if he had been waiting for her to understand. It wasn't long before the two became inseparable. They spent their days together by the water, and Olajumoke soon learned the ways of the lake. Abiola taught her how to read the sky, the signs of the fish, and how to listen to the rhythm of nature. Through these simple lessons, she realized that Abiola's silence was not emptiness. It was fullness, a deep connection with the world that spoke louder than any words ever could. But as their love blossomed, so did the pressure from the village. Suleiman, seeing that Olajumoke had no interest in him, grew angry. He went to the elders, telling them that it was shameful for Olajumoke to marry a man who could not even speak. They called a meeting and demanded that Olajumoke choose between her love for Abiola and her duty to marry a man of status. Olajumoke, heartbroken, returned to the lake that evening. She found Abiola there, as always, playing his flute. But this time his music was different. There was a sorrow in it, a sadness that seemed to fill the air around them. "Why do they want us to part?" she asked, her voice shaking. Abiola stopped playing and looked at her, his eyes filled with understanding. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small polished stone, a gift he had made for her with his own hands. He placed it in her palm. The stone was carved in the shape of a heart, and as Olajumoke turned it over in her hands, she felt a warmth spread through her. "I want to be with you," she said, tears in her eyes. "But they won't let us be." Abiola, though unable to speak, gently took her hand, pressing the stone into her palm. He smiled and nodded, as if to say that it would be all right. His silence spoke volumes. His love for her was deep, and they would find a way to be together. The next day, something unexpected happened. The king himself, who had been passing through the village, heard Abiola's flute as he was riding by the lake. The king, moved by the music, ordered his guards to find the man who played such a beautiful song. When they brought Abiola before him, the king, who had never been moved by music in his long life, was stunned. The king asked through an interpreter, "Young man, I have heard your music, and it touches my soul. You must come to the palace. I will make you my court musician, and I will grant you whatever you wish." Abiola, though he could not speak, knew what he wanted. Through the interpreter, he asked for one thing: to marry Olajumoke. The king, understanding the power of love, smiled and granted his wish. The wedding was held at the palace the very next day, with Olajumoke and Abiola's union celebrated by the entire kingdom. The two lived happily, their love growing with each passing day, and though Abiola never spoke a word, his music became the heartbeat of the kingdom. And Olajumoke, the once wealthy seamstress, had everything she could ever want, not in riches, but in the deep, abiding love of a man who spoke through the language of the soul.